In his book, Forensic Faith, Jim makes the case for Christians to be case makers for Christ and why it's vital to do so right now.
J. Warner Wallace is with us now. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's so interesting to come across material like yours or Lee Strobel, gentlemen who set out to maybe even disprove the Bible's authenticity and truth, or maybe you went to it with a more open mind and then come out of the experience believers.
Yeah, and Lee's a friend of mine too, and I think our stories are similar, right, in that sense that he was really trying to respond to his wife's interest in the gospel, and I kind of was too. My wife was not a believer, but I think she sensed there was some innate value in religion and Christianity, and from her own upbringing. So she decided we wanted to go to church. Our kids were very young. I was working undercover at the time, and I said, okay, I'm willing to go as an atheist because I figured, hey, I want to please her. So I went, and probably a lot of us go to church for the first time because we have a believing spouse that drags us in. But I didn't want to, I was probably blessed that day because the pastor pitched Jesus in a way that I could catch him. He intrigued me. He said a bunch of things, but the thing that I remember, the only thing I remember from that first day was that he said that Jesus was the most, smartest man who'd ever lived. And as I read through I bought a Bible.
Why did that grab you so much?
I think because I was interested in wisdom. But basically, he also said that he was so wise that the moral teaching of Jesus had become the foundation for Western civilization. And here I was, working as a police officer, enforcing the laws that this pastor now is telling me were grounded in the teaching of Jesus. Really? Let me take a look then and see if that was true. And that's where I spent the first, 6 months. And what I was really encouraged by was the evidential approach that Jesus himself took in the narratives. He would say things like in the Gospel of John where he'll say, hey, if you don't believe what I just told you, at least believe on the evidence of these miracles I've worked in front of you. He would allow Thomas to touch his wounds. He would spend 40 days with the disciples in Acts 1, showing them convincing proofs, evidences. And as I read that, I thought, wow, he seems to be a man after my own heart in the sense that he didn't just make proclamations about visions he'd had.
Investigate me.
Yeah, he's saying, I'm here for you to see publicly to know if this is true.
So as a cold case detective, what was the evidence that transformed your life?
A lot of times it comes down to how we evaluate witnesses. Can we trust? Because you can make an entire case by just calling in witnesses who will tell you what they saw 30 years ago. But we have to evaluate the witnesses to know if they are reliable. So we have a process in place. As I applied that process to the gospel authors, they passed the test. But what that did for me is it gave me a different idea of what faith is. I couldn't understand if faith was unreasonable. If I had to believe things that there was actually evidence that demonstrated they weren't true, then I was out. If I had to believe things even though there was no evidence at all I could examine, then I was really out too. But if you're telling me that faith is really the step you take at the end of an evidence trail, because every evidence trail stops just short of perfect, and you have to make a step of trust based on the evidence. Now, we could call that step faith, but that's really what we're doing here. And by the way, every worldview does this. Even as an atheist, I did this. But I think now, as I've examined this, the step of faith across that unknown boundary is much shorter for Christianity than any other worldview.
Do you think many Christians, sincere followers of Christ, are naive to or even ignorant of the fact that there is so much evidence for the truth of Jesus Christ?
Oh, absolutely. I hate to say that, but I wrote 2 books before this book where I talk about the evidence for Christianity and the evidence for God's existence. And as I travel around the country to make the case to churches, I can't tell you how many churchgoers would come up to me and say, I've never, ever heard any of this. And I've been a Christian for 20 years. Now, I think that they probably have been great Christians too. But there's a difference now in this generation of young people who are walking away from the church in record numbers, who are walking away when you ask them why they are walking away. Most of the largest blocks of answers are some form of skepticism, evidential skepticism. We could actually address that and help this generation if we took a more forensic approach to our faith.
What is wrong, so to speak, with a believer saying, look, I know it's true because of my personal experience and how Jesus has transformed my life?
Well, let's play a little devil's advocate. Okay, I'm a Mormon, and I know Mormonism is true. And I know that your view, it can't be true if my view is true, but I know my Mormonism is true based on the same thing. I was raised in the church, and I've had an experience of the Holy Spirit that confirmed for me that Joseph is a prophet of God, and the Book of Mormon is true. okay, well, we're now at a we're kind of at a standstill. If all we're going to do is trust our experiences, well, every religious believer, if I'm a Buddhist, if I'm a Mormon, if I'm a Muslim, if I'm a Christian, can come at it that way. But we happen to have the one worldview that is grounded in an historical event called the resurrection. If that didn't occur, none of this is true. But it turns out we could investigate it. And then our answer would be, well, I'm a Christian because I've examined the evidence, and I discovered there was a man who was actually God. God himself came to us and rose from the grave to demonstrate his deity to us. And on the basis of that, we can know with certainty that we have a resurrection coming and that he has the power. The words of God are being spoken by this man named Jesus of Nazareth. That's a very different approach.
I say unequivocally that the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance by proof which leaves absolutely no room for doubt. World's most successful attorney, the Guinness Book of World Records, twice knighted by the Queen, former atheist, Sir Lionel Luckhoo,